Hey everybody, it's Jennifer J. Welcome back to Moving Forward. I'm so glad you're joining us today. Hey, I was so excited to hear this sermon that I'm going to share with you today because it was by my own Pastor Mackey at Pilgrim, but he started right out of the gate talking about biblical numerology. And you guys know how I love biblical numerology. So he was talking about the number 7. And that 7 is of God and represents completeness, right? So he used some examples. He said God rested on the 7th day. You know, creation was created in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. You can find that in the book of Genesis. And also Joshua, when he walked around the wall of Jericho before it fell. So he walked one time for 6 days, and on the 7th day he walked around it 7 times. And on the 7th day, when he blew the horn, it fell completely flat. It fell and it was completely ruined. So there were also 7 sayings on the cross. When Jesus was on the cross, there were 7 things that he said. So he also used this one. I thought was strange, but he said we have 7 holes in our head. So I need to do some research on that because we do. It is true. But I'm not sure what significance that had. I missed that part. But he said we have the armor of God and it's the armor for God. So we need to use it. But he said, you know, we've been going over this I can't lose with the stuff I use. This was part 7. So if you are going to look it up, I will attach this one, or I'll try. I know every time I always try. But there are 6 ones before this that are called the same thing. They're just part 1 through 7. So he did a piece of the armor for each sermon. So there are 6 pieces of armor. He said the 7th piece of armor is actually prayer. So prayer is the enablement that allows us to use the equipment. So the armor of God is the equipment, but prayer is the power behind the equipment. So he said how we ought to pray. We need to pray spiritually. Pray in the Spirit. And he used Romans 8:26, and I did want to read that to you. 8:26 says, likewise, the Spirit also helps our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And you can look up that word groanings in Galatians 4:6 as well. I made a note of that if you want to study that. But we don't know what we need to pray for, but the Holy Spirit prays for us. He said it's not about talking, it's about listening. That really struck me, you guys, because I'm a talker. But we need to pray and listen to the Holy Spirit. So we need to wait on what God says we should pray for and who we should pray for. And the Spirit will enable us. And that reminded me when he said that, you know, ask who we should pray for. I may have told you guys this before, but when I wake up in the middle of the night, I always ask God, who should I pray for? And typically, before I even get the words out, he has brought someone to mind. It could be someone I haven't thought about since kindergarten, you guys. It could be someone I met yesterday. It could be someone I didn't meet, but someone I saw. Or it could be somebody in my family, or, you know, a close friend. It could just be anybody. But somebody will come to my mind, either their name or their face, immediately when I ask him that. And typically, once I pray for them, I go right back to sleep. So if I don't go right back to sleep, I ask again, because sometimes there's someone else, or sometimes that situation is bigger than what I thought and it needs more prayer. So anyway, I do that. So you do need to pray and listen to the Lord of who he asked you to pray for. But then he says pray spiritually, but then also pray steadily. So he says pray always. Jesus also said in Luke 18:1, always pray and don't get worried or discouraged. And I am going to look up real quick Luke 18:1 for you, where it says, and he spoke a parable unto them to this end, that men ought always to pray and not to faint. So that means don't get weary in praying. So he says about praying always, turn your worry list into your prayer list. Don't do anything without God. So praying always doesn't mean you have to be on your knees, you know, with your hands folded constantly in prayer and not doing anything else. We know that you have to eat your food. We know that you have to sleep. We know that you have to go to work or take care of the kids or whatever it is that you do in the day, there are other things a person has to do. In a little bit, I have to go to the store. We have to do these things, but we can still be praying. You can have a spirit of prayer all the time. When I'm on the highway, sometimes even just when I'm home, because I can see the highway, I will pray for the cars going by. Sometimes I'll see a particular car and I'll be drawn to it and pray for the people in that car or their family members. You can pray all the time. You can pray wherever you are all the time, and you should be praying all the time. And also part of that prayer, remember, is listening though too. But pray about everything. So pray spiritually and pray steadily. And then, he said, this was good. Pray sincerely. So in verse 18, what we just read, Ephesians 6:18. Let me get back there because I didn't even read that to you. That's what the whole sermon is based on. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 18. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians. Let's get there. Ephesians 6, 18. And it says, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. So he was using that word supplication, and he said supplication is specific prayer. So you can pray about everything, right? Pray always and pray about everything. Supplication is specific prayer. So you want to be very specific about what you're praying for. In other words, if you don't just say, Lord, bless my finances, but maybe what you say is, Lord, I have this specific bill. I have rent due on this day and I need it covered. That's being specific, right? But he says, whatever you pray about is what you trust God to be able to handle, and whatever you don't pray about are things you don't trust him with. So be really careful that you trust him with all of it. He says, what are you leaving off of your prayer list? He said the main reason for unanswered prayer is because it's unuttered prayer. In other words, you didn't ask. So be sure you ask. In Matthew 7:7, it says, knock and keep on knocking, ask and keep on asking. He will open the door for you. So just keep praying. And then the last thing is, so he said, pray spiritually, pray steadily, pray sincerely, and pray selflessly. He said, pray for everyone. He did say, pray for yourself. Don't be afraid to pray for yourself. If you don't pray for yourself, I think that you should. But in 1 Chronicles 4:10, it's the prayer of Jabez. Jabez prayed, enlarge my territory, right? In Matthew 26:36, Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he prays for himself. He asks God to take this cup away from him if it's possible. But he prayed, he wanted God's will to be done, right? So the cup did not pass from him because he also prayed, God, your will be done, and that was God's will. But he said, don't put your blessings on hold. Pray for others, because it's a battlefield, right? That's why we're having the spiritual armor of God in the first place, because it's a battlefield. And he talked about Job. And in Job, if you remember the story of Job, he had messengers come and tell him that all his sheep, Job was a very wealthy man, but all his sheep had died. All his sheep had been slaughtered. And then another runner came and told him all of his camels had been slaughtered. And pretty soon somebody comes and tells him all 10 of his children were in a house, and a big east wind came and blew the house down, and all 10 of his children are dead. He's getting all this news in one day. And he still praises God. And then his wife tells him, just curse God and die. And then his friends come, and his friends aren't empathetic or encouraging or anything. They say, you must have done something really, really bad, dude. You're getting all this curse on you. And so they weren't helpful. But what Job did in chapter 42 and verse 10, Job prayed for them. They were being all kinds of horrible to him. They were not being very good friends, but he prayed for them. And when he did, in verse 10, it says, when he prayed for them, God restored all that he had and doubled what he had had before. So it makes a difference when you pray for others. You need to pray for others. It might not be people you like. It might not be people that are being nice to you. Like as in Job's case, they were his friends, but they weren't being very kind. And you can pray for those folks. So whoever the Spirit leads you to pray for, and I hope you're listening, I hope you will pray for them. And I hope that you won't be afraid to pray for yourself. It's okay to pray for yourself. Always pray in God's will, right? We want to be sure we're listening to the Spirit. We don't just want to pray, as the pastor said, we don't want to pray that our numbers hit right. Like if you're playing the lottery, right, and you're just praying that you got the winning ticket. That's not the kind of prayer we're talking about. We're talking about Spirit-led prayer, that God leads you to pray in the way that you ought to. But don't be afraid to cast all your cares on him, because he does care for you and he wants to hear from you. So I hope that encourages you today, and I hope that you will remember to pray for yourself and pray for others. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.